Thank you for joining us today for our Career Conversations podcast. And we're very excited to be joined today by Dr. Gabriela Schlau-Cohen, who was a 2016 Beckman Young Investigator here with the foundation. And we're excited to catch up with her and talk a little bit about how her career path went and how she has gotten where she is today. So welcome, Gabriela. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
So would you like to start kind of back at the beginning? If you could think back to, maybe it was high school, maybe even before. What was the first time where you're like, I want to be a scientist and this is a real cool career that I want to pursue?
I think I had some initial interest in science starting in middle school. I remember I had this in my middle school science class, I had this project where we were supposed to look at squirrels. And so I remember spending hours doing this project and just looking out the window of my living room, looking at these squirrels. And it was the first time I really noticed or thought about squirrels. And I looked at how they chased each other and went around the tree. And I think in some ways that was my first initial interest in science, because it was that idea of let's look at the world around us and see something that we might not have seen before or might not have fully realized. And I had forgotten about this for years, and now I have a daughter who is in elementary school and in science classes doing similar things, and this squirrel memory has just come back to me in recent years. So I encourage you all to just take a minute today and look at some squirrels outside your window.
Right. So
But
how did you
then,
jump from squirrels to more sophisticated science?
then when I was in high school, I had this really amazing chemistry teacher. And I loved this chemistry class. And I would say this was what really nucleated and directed my interest in science onto chemistry, and even specifically to physical chemistry, the area I still work in today. And so this chemistry teacher talked about science, but in a way that really connected microscopic behaviors with macroscopic properties. And that's something that still fascinates me. And in particular, one of the things that was so interesting was in this course, we started to talk about models of atoms and then molecules and how electrons were just both waves and particles. And this was the first time I was introduced to this idea of wave-particle duality. And that concept of something so different in the microscopic world that anything I saw in my lived experience, that really, was fascinating to me, and kind of focused my attention onto physical chemistry, led to me majoring in chemical physics, then doing a PhD in physical chemistry, and now having a research group at MIT in the physical chemistry division.
All right. So that was a very early latching on to a concept that you've taken all the way. So I'm kind of curious, how did you sort of take that passion and say, this is the school I want to go to? Or, and then as you were working in there, like, how did you find the right mentor that really lined up with your passion, since you sort of came to it with like, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I went to undergrad, and for me, I made the decision to go to Brown University. There's a lot of intellectual freedom at that school. I don't like being told what to do. There's also a lot of intellectual freedom in academia, and that really allowed me to follow a major, chemical physics, at the interface of physics and chemistry, which is still where I sit today, and follow that path that was tied to my own interest. And I became interested in using laser-based methods to look at electrons and how they behave. And that got me interested in a field called ultrafast spectroscopy, where you use very short laser pulses that allow you to look at the different electronic states of molecular systems. Then when I went to my PhD, I still was interested in that, but I was really, I learned about a group using those kinds of tools to look at photosynthesis. And the idea of using those tools to look at something like a plant that again is connected to my life and more grounded. I can see it out my window. That was really exciting. The idea of like, again, connecting these microscopic behaviors to some macroscopic structure that, powers most life on Earth.
Yeah.
And that in many ways laid the groundwork for then where my research program has gone, where I continue to use these laser-based methods and these tools from physical chemistry, but I use them to look at biological systems.
Okay. So how did you, so when you were in college, you discovered this and sort of that drove your grad school direction, or did you find them in grad school and then did that
Yeah.
drive your postdoc direction?
When I was in undergrad, I got interested in this class of tools of ultrafast spectroscopy, using lasers to look at how electrons move in molecular systems.
Mhm.
And during that time, I didn't like biology. To me, the biology I was taught was just memorizing things that I couldn't really grasp onto.
Lots of names of pathways.
Yes, that just went in one ear and out the other. And then when I started grad school, I discovered that there were groups using these tools to look at biology, to really understand at the same microscopic level how those biological systems were working. So my graduate research became the application of these methods to biological systems.
So for those who are kind of approaching these transitions, can you sort of think back to that time? Like, how did you approach the professors you wanted to work with? Do you have any sort of tips? If someone is looking at your lab and is like, oh my gosh, I love what Gabriela is doing. Like, how do you start to make those connections or make those introductions?
So I think it all comes back to your scientific passion, what you're excited about, what motivates you scientifically. That's what guides the choice of group, and that's what should guide your connection. So when I advise people about reaching out to faculty or reaching out to scientists in general, I always encourage people to write something short in the following structure: a brief introduction, a statement about what is in that group that drew your attention, a statement about who you are, and what your background is that has kind of led you to this, and then really explicitly draw the connection between the two. What is it about your background that you think could contribute to, or makes you excited about, or makes you want to learn more about the research that you see? And so I think that that's the way you want to think about things. And similarly, that's the way you want to reach out to people.
And you had good success. Do you see good success following that model, or are people approaching you in that way these days?
Um, yeah, sometimes. I think one thing that people tend to do is do almost one side or the other. They'll write me something really just stating what I do, or they'll write me something with a detailed description of their own background. And I think really synthesizing those two and showing the connections and bringing them together is a really important step that people don't always take. And I think is important in how you approach everything and how you think about what you're doing. That critical thinking about where the combinations and the opportunities are, not just a restatement of what the current research in a group is or a summary of what one's experience is.
And do you look for things outside of science? How to sort of bring in other experiences? Just thinking like oh, I've also taken classes in mentorship, or I also understand, maybe some of the more soft skill things. And how do you look for a sort of a well-rounded person?
Yeah, I think those soft skill things have so many variations. And I think those soft skill things are actually embedded in the scientific discussion. Because in many ways, that critical thinking or that executive function to not just read the science, understand it, and restate it, or have done a ton of science is intrinsic to the idea that someone who's reaching out to you is connecting those two things. Because that's thinking beyond yourself to how you can engage with others. So I think those soft skill things are in many ways best evaluated in the performing rather than on paper.
And where did you in your career pick up these tips? Where could people be looking for those opportunities to say, I'm a really driven scientist and I also need to take, a few of these other things? Do you have any suggestions or advice?
Yeah, so one thing that I really believe in and I think is important is scientific communication. Because we need to communicate our science in order to do it. There's no science, there's very little science today that's done by one person in isolation. People work with other people in their research group, people work with other research groups, other communities, and then that science needs to be communicated to the scientific community in order to build, in order to allow others to build on it, and to the world in order for it to be translated into new companies and new innovation, and for the public to adopt it and to support it. And so I really believe in scientific communication. So for example, one thing that I did in undergrad is I took a public speaking course. And that was really important for me in communicating my science individually and also feeling comfortable, in some ways, your entire career is public speaking, whether you're public speaking to one person or to a room of 1,000. And so that's an example of a case that I think is important, and I had an opportunity and I took that opportunity. Similarly, as you go to in undergrad, grad school, your postdoc, they'll often be offered other scientific communication classes in visual communication and writing. And I think these are skills that are transferable in many jobs, but often undervalued in science, but intrinsic to how science is performed.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that quick look through your career and that advice. Is there anything else that you would like to say to those who are just starting out and thinking about all the options in front of them?
I want to reiterate to follow your scientific passion. A lot of times people start thinking about, oh, what's the best strategic move? What's the hot areas? And those areas will come through your passion. You'll do the best science that you can do if you follow your passion, and that's what will open up the most doors.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that advice and your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.